My name is Richard A. Gomez, and I'm from Alamosa, Colorado. Well, my family history, my family has been here since they did the land grants. They were one of the original people of the first land grants in 1857. They got a land grant up in Osher. It was 600 acres. And then they got another one along the Conejos River, which was 300 acres. But then the one up in Osher, they lost it because they didn't pay the taxes, and it was only $18. But they weren't educated enough to realize that you had to pay taxes to live on it. But the one on the river, the one there by Guadalupe, that belongs to Reyes Jaramillo now, or did, he already passed away. They held on to that till when I was a little boy. They sold it. I thought I was about 10 because they sold the farm and the ranch and built a new house. My grandfather's land, but they sold it to him. But they had a bunch of sheep. Up in Osher, they had about 500 sheep, and that's what really started me to think about going to college, because they'd send me up in the summer to watch the sheep, and I'd sit there and look at the damn clouds and look at nothing going on except the damn sheep would run across the road, and then I'd have to go get them. But then I thought, I'm not going to do this the rest of my life. So I decided to go to college then when I was in the first or second grade, and I went to college. I left in 1974 to 77. But more or less I was forced out because I was working for the agency already. And they more or less wanted me to force me out, and by moving me to Brighton, they thought they could get rid of me because they didn't think that I would move to Brighton because I was so connected to the valley. But they didn't know that I had grown up in Denver since I was born till about the ninth, when I was 9 years old. So I liked Denver and Brighton, but my whole thing was to come back and do whatever I could for the people of the valley. So I went to Trinidad State Junior College. That's where I started school. The middle school was at Sacred Heart College and Sacred Heart School in Denver. And then when we moved back to the valley, I went to the Conejos Grade School, and then the high school in Antonito. Well, I didn't have any problem moving from a big city to a little town. I don't know why. I guess because all my uncles were living there and they were going to school. So in Conejos, not in Antonito, or even at that Catholic school in Denver. I didn't remember being treated any differently. But I was a pretty smart kid, see. They wouldn't hardly mess with me because I was tops in the class all the time. So they'd leave me alone. And then I wouldn't hesitate to tell people anything. If I didn't like it, I'd tell them. And I'd tell them in a nice way. I wouldn't. I'd never hold back if I thought it was wrong. I'd tell them, well, I don't believe that, or just go ahead and tell them. Just like one time when I was in college here at Adams State, I was taking industrial arts, and they were doing little projects of tin. So, and there was about 15, 20 people in there. The guy that was grading the projects, and I noticed it right away. He'd grade the projects A, B, C, but the angles he would give them an A, And maybe we gave one beet to a Hispanic, and then the rest of us were C's. And I got on his case over that. I told him that's discriminatory what you're doing, and that's blatant. I told him that's blatant what you're doing. And he backed off. I don't remember the professor's name, but he backed off. Well, you know what? They didn't. There was only a few farmers that got loans out of 31. Out of 36, one day I counted in the jurisdiction I had as district director, only 2 Hispanic farmer loans were made out of the 36. They'd always find ways to deny them in some way. There was always a denial. They'd meet with the appraisers and make the appraiser lower the appraisal so they wouldn't give them the money, or they wouldn't give them enough money to operate. You know, they give them a little bit of money, but not enough to make it where they had enough money to operate. And actually, sometimes they broke them because they didn't give them enough money. And like back in when I went to New Mexico, you know, they grow cotton there and chili and all that. Well, and they used to have to plant those in April and at the latest July, and then they wouldn't have the money for them till August. So they couldn't buy whatever they needed, a tractor, whatever. So they'd break them right away. That was happening all over the country, not just here. Well, the loan at that time when I was there wasn't as big. It was only about three sheets, a back and a front of the applications, and then some non-discrimination stuff, and that's what it was about it. I don't know what it is now. Probably gotten a lot more paperwork, but it wasn't big. But they wouldn't help the farmer to fill out the application. And then they'd always find ways to say, well, you didn't complete all the application, so they'd give them back the application, and then they'd have to come in, and then the next time they'd find something else wrong with it. There was always a back and forth with it. And then by the time we knew it, we didn't have any money to lend. It was all gone. And it was all gone to the Anglo farmers. When I started working in 1969, well, I saw it with, who was it? With Tony Martinez from La Jera. Because he walked in there, and before he knew it, there was a shouting match with the first supervisor I had was Bill Downing. It was a shouting match, and he ran him out of the office because they were arguing over how much money should be lent, and Bill didn't want to give him all the money, and he said, you don't need this and you don't need that. And that's when I first saw it. But then finally, the county committee finally overrode the supervisor's decision, so they did lend him all the money, but he had to go in front of the county committee. But there was one Hispanic on the committee by the name of Dan Rios, and he was the one that convinced the other ones to lend him the money because he was a good farmer. But they were trying to say Tony didn't have enough experience, but he grew up on a farm and had some knowledge and had some education in ag. So that's when I first noticed it. But then Bill retired, and then another supervisor came in by the name of Steve DeCamp, and he was terrible. He was the worst man I've ever seen in discrimination. That was blatant. He went out over here on the county line road and picked up this guy was delinquent on his loan. and went and got some people to buy the potatoes for 50 cents a sack. He had a whole shed full, I don't know how many sacks. But when they sold it for 50 cents a piece, he couldn't make the loan payment because there wasn't enough money to make the loan payment. So right away, when he couldn't make the loan payment, he threw it into foreclosure. Well, I had a lot of experience in EEO because I was an EEO counselor too for I don't know how many years, and I was an EEO counselor for 13 states, and I saw it all over the country. And I saw people get in trouble in New Mexico because they made a loan to a Hispanic, and I'd have to go down there and try to resolve that. And then when they didn't like the way that I would write up my reports, then they didn't let me go directly to the site anymore. I had to do everything through the telephone. So then that's how I had to write up my reports and more or less visualize what had happened, and that's how I did it through the phone for 15 years. But I was pretty well known as a good counselor, because I wouldn't back away from them. Well, some of the Anglos thought me as a big troublemaker. I was told that several times. The state director in New Mexico, the second time I went down there, I confronted him about 3 cases in New Mexico where they denied the loans to the Hispanics. He threw me out of his office. And then he got fired the next day from D.C. though. His name was Jim Hudson. But he threw me out of his office. He told me, "Get the hell out of here. I don't believe in EEO." And then I got on the phone and called Washington, and he was fired the next day, and it was in the Raton paper later that he had been the next day, because I had to come back to the Raton because I had a case in Trinidad. That was one of my offices though. And then the next day I saw it in the Raton paper that he had been fired, Jim Hudson. Well, it started since the beginning because they would come to my office when they were denied. I had a reputation for standing behind them. Sometimes I couldn't do anything because I didn't have loan approval authority, but most of them would come to the office. And see, my office wasn't in the same office. My office was located at the Savings and Loan Building, so they knew I was over there. So we could talk. Nobody could overhear it. We could talk in the office. And Jessica was in part of that in my office. And so was Ona, and they'd come out pulled in their hair sometimes with what had happened, how I'd get into it with them. But another thing is, Costilla County had the most Hispanic borrowers, and there was a lot of them in there. Most of them were Hispanic that got loans. And so that's why they wanted to close it and move it here. Well, it broke some farmers. And they don't even trust FHA down there anymore. You can't go over there and talk to the Hispanic farmers about FHA because they don't like the way they were treated. Well, I don't know if it changed me because I already had committed even before the Garcia case started. I was already committed to doing something about it. The Garcia case came in later after I had started my thing. I started on the case in 2000. What is it now? 2016? Yeah. And they're barely settled completely in January of 16. That was in the last case. The last check was sent out in January. No, I thought I had accomplished the day the attorneys for the Garcia Vilsack case, when they contacted me to help them, to write up an affidavit and a declaration. That's when I knew I that I was going somewhere with it because there were some big, powerful attorneys involved in it. Howery was one of the biggest firms in the country on discrimination. The only thing that happened is he died, and it disabled itself. And then I ended up still doing it after he died. And I ended up, they had committed to pay me, and they never paid me anything. So I ended up doing it for nothing, just because I was already committed to it. I couldn't leave the farmers holding the hat because they weren't going to know what to do. But I knew more about what to do with the case than actually the attorneys. Now I had a few threatening phone calls at the house, so I changed my phone number, and then I called the cops, and they went and talked to them. But I haven't had any since. Oh, that I shouldn't be doing it, and that I was wasting taxpayers' money, and how, there's no discrimination. So I paste a record thing, and then I take it to the cops, and then they went and visited him, and it stopped. And they were both from the community. The only thing I've been doing now is working on this case. I'm still working on it a little bit. Seems like I can't stop. But I enjoy it. I can guarantee you I enjoy it. I like to fight. I bet I put, since 2000, I would say 15, 20 hours a week on it. Oh, in my career, I don't know, there was always something going on. Somebody was always complaining. And I even had a farmer out going south. I can't remember his name now, but he's a white borrower, and he came in the office and was telling me off that I was just helping the Hispanics. And I said, no way, look at this. Here's my records. But he doesn't the other day I saw him at Chili's, and he wouldn't talk to me. Even this morning I had a conversation with some lady that called Tony Martinez. His wife called me about that there was going to be a meeting in Najera on the Knights of Columbus, and they wanted me to go. And we were talking about it, and she herself feels like it's gotten worse. That it's gotten worse, it hasn't improved. She thinks it's gotten worse, especially since President Obama became president. They've gotten worse about, they don't even care. It's just like the other day I was walking out of the Loaf and Jug, and this white guy came up to me and he said, "You fucking old man," pardon my language, but that's exactly what he told me. So I got on the phone and I called the cops. And I'm going to put up with that. That's why I pay my meal levy for the cops. With the Frank Velarde case. And that was in the early 80s, I think. I can't remember the exact time. But what they did is he applied for a loan and they denied it. He applied for a $200,000 loan and they denied the loan because he had a collection of $220. They could have paid the collection out of the loan, but they didn't. They insisted that he had the collection. We're not going to make the loan. Your credit's bad and your credit's bad. And so they denied him. And then they had told the supervisor to take me out there to talk to Frank. So when we got there, Frank wasn't home. And I left, and then they sent him the rejection letter, and he called me real mad about it. And I said, well, I told Bill Chandler to have you meet us there, and I'll be there in this afternoon or whenever. And I got there and he wasn't there. Then we were coming back out back to Trinidad because he lived in Kim. And we were coming back from Trinidad, and I looked at the county committee certification. It was signed in blank. It was in the file in blank, signed in blank. No name on it, who it was to. And he was just going to put the name in afterwards. So we got in an argument over that. And I said, you can't be doing that. So then I called the county committee, and they said, well, he didn't tell us what it was for, who he was going to foreclose on, and we just signed it. That's all he lets us. That's how he does it. We just sign it. So that's when and then I got back, and so the next day I called the chief of farmer programs about it, and he says, well, you know why we sent you out there? Because you're Hispanic. We thought you could just say that there's no discrimination. I said, the hell there wasn't. And it went from there, it went all the way to the U.S. attorney and everywhere. Well, the U.S. attorney had me he had me in his office for 2 days, questioning me between him, another attorney, and then the state director and the chief of farmer programs. I think it was Gary Wall then. And they were trying to convince me to change my mind that there was no discrimination. But they thought they had finally, in 2 days, they questioned me and took notes. And they thought they had already changed me at the end of the second day. So I was real nice to the U.S. attorney's name was Winchester. And I asked him for a copy of the notes that he'd taken. And he said, there's no problem with it. And I said, well, give them to me. So he gave them to me. And I got those notes, and I was president of the union, and so I went to the Labor Relations Authority with the notes. And then I told the Labor Relations Authority, they had me in there for 2 days. They didn't give me a right to an attorney or nothing. That was violating my rights. And I want something done about it. And I'm telling you, that within 2 days, they were on it, the Labor Relations Authority. And that U.S. attorney got fired over it for violating my rights. And when he got fired, he called Ona, my secretary at that time, and he told Ona, well, I can't believe what he did to me. And Ona told him, well, you ran into a guy that knows what he's doing. And he might not say nothing right away, but he'll get you. He might not, that's how I tell my kids too. I always say, before you say anything, you think it out, because you might have to answer for those words if they're wrong. So that's why I always hold back and then think it over, and then if I have to, go at it later with 2 boxing gloves. But that was quite an ordeal. I couldn't even drive home that night because I was so messed up in the head after I had to call my wife and tell her, I'm not going home tonight. My head is too messed up. And I stayed there, and then the next morning I went to Federal Labor Relations Authority on Spear Boulevard. But it didn't take them long to get on it. But later on, they were, I had some confrontations with them along the way too, and when I was still president of the union, I had several with Judy Jackledge, and I don't remember who the administrative officer was, but I had several runs in with them, and then I more or less had the Labor Relations Authority contact them every day, and then finally they were calling me to ask me if it was right what they were doing, because I would just wait for them to do something wrong and then jump on their case, because that's what they were doing to me. And I wasn't afraid of them, so. Well, the only thing that kept me going is that I would say to myself, now they can take my job, but they can't take my life. So, and I probably could find a job somewhere else. So, and that's what kept me going. And then my wife would support me. Well, in Demetrio Valdez, he stayed because he could continue farming. But there's a lot of them that have left because they haven't been able to get anything, so they have to leave. They'll starve here. There's no work. There's a lot better work now than there was then, but I'm glad I came back. Well, all the ones I did got approved. Or a couple didn't, but most of the ones that I did affidavits and declarations and their paperwork got approved. Because you have to have direct insight on it. You have to know exactly what happened. And that's what I did with the cases. I had direct knowledge of what had happened with them. And the declarations and affidavits were written that way. And the ones that the other attorneys wrote up, well, they didn't know exactly what happened. So they couldn't write up a real intelligent report. I think about it, and sometimes then I say to myself, well, I should have contacted him or her. But you can't, remember everything. Well, some of them thought that they wouldn't get anywhere with it because of, that when they applied and then got denied and then appealed and they were still denied. I had a case, well, it's not a case, but I went to a meeting in Dallas on discrimination. They were having a discrimination thing, training for all over the country, and I went to that meeting. And then they had telling us how to look for on discrimination and that. But at one of the times that two guys from Colorado got up, the district director and the county supervisor got up and went outside out of the meeting, and then came back, and they had another guy that they had taken out and had him like he was handcuffed, and they were going to ship him back to Mexico. And I rose holy hell about that, because I didn't think they should have been doing, training us with that kind of mock session where they were saying, well, you're applying for a loan, we're going to send you back to Mexico. It's just like Trump saying, well, we're going to send them all back now. So every time I hear Trump say that, I remember about that. And I rose holy hell about that. And the guy from Grand Junction, he retired right after that. But the other guy, they still appointed him a reviewing officer on loans. And he still stayed for a while. But he got real sick after a while. But that guy was that guy was terrible. He sold those potatoes on that guy. Another guy he went and got. He had a farm, Miguel Gonzalez out there in the Jara. He was getting on his loan. He went and rented a semi and loaded all his sheep and sold them. And the guy didn't have any money to pay his real estate, so they foreclosed on him. That destroyed that man. Got sick. I haven't seen him. I asked his wife the other day, and he said, well, he's still kicking. That's what she said. Well, I was the first Hispanic hired men. But they were forced to hire me out of D.C. because I had a degree in construction management. They wanted an inspector. So they came all the way from D.C. to hire me here in the valley. And in 2 weeks I was working, but from then on I started seeing things that I didn't like, and I wasn't used to seeing that stuff. But there was a guy by the name of Earl Bell came all the way from D.C. to hire me if he wanted to go, and a few weeks later I was working. And then I wanted, because our construction business was doing real well. But then I was going to, at the beginning I thought like resigning and going back to construction, but then my mom didn't let me. She told me to stay, and I'm glad I did. So now I got a good retirement. I don't have to worry about work or money or anything. But they did a lot of things to people that you don't see at all. I said, "Dear President Obama, I'm writing this letter on the discrimination of the Hispanic farmers by the U.S. government and USDA. I worked for USDA from 1970 to 2000. There were very few days that I didn't see discriminatory practice against Hispanic people and Hispanic farmers. I was actually transferred within the agency FMHA USDA at one time for complaining about discrimination or minority farmers. I saw discrimination within several states as I was an EEO counselor for 13 states. I even saw Hispanic farmers come to the defense of Anglo loan offers for making loans for them. There were several Anglo agents that were told not to make Hispanic loans, and I got in trouble and were reprimanded and even made to retire, to resign. When I worked for FMHA, in order to be a loan officer, you had to have a degree in agriculture. That's how the department kept Hispanic and blacks out of supervisory positions. In 1988, minorities and women filed a complaint as a class action suit on the department that the ag requirements were discriminatory. The department was forced to abandon that requirement, and some Hispanics and women got into supervisory positions, and to lending to minority was starting to change. But the Department of Agriculture, being so discriminatory, managed to do away with Farmers Home Administration and created rural development at Farm Service Agency. Well, the minority with no agriculture degree were moved to rural development, and the Anglos with agriculture degrees went to the Farm Service Agency. That is how they have continued to keep discrimination practices continue against Hispanic and black farmers. I believe if you would do an investigation of this change, you will find that this change was done in order not to make loans to blacks and Hispanics and women. This has to change. The USDA, by creating Farm Service Agency, continues to practice within their old ways. No change happened in lending practice. Minorities mostly do not obtain agriculture degrees. As I have had several farmers go into FSA and file applications for loans, and most of the time they are denied loans and other loan services that FSA can provide. The discriminatory practice still continue. No change. FSA was created to discriminate, to retaliate on farmers that are members of the class suit. The department, USDA or Rural Development even have retaliated on me for doing a declaration on behalf of farmers Hispanic.